Number 10. The Titanic pose. A couple in India were about to get married when they decided to do a pre-wedding photo shoot. Unfortunately for the couple, the daring photo shoot ended up canceling their marriage and canceling their lives. According to the local police, the couple wanted to take dramatic pictures while acting out scenes from the Titanic. They wanted to do the pose from the iconic scene with Jack and Rose on the bow of the boat, but the resort didn't have a motorboat available. So the couple had to get a coracle to take them in the water. The coracle wasn't the most reliable vehicle though. It ended up tipping over during the photo shoot, causing both of them to drown. To make the situation that much worse, the boat tipped over all because of the woman's high-heeled sandals. Their shoddy vessel was only about 80 feet from the riverbank. The photographer and the woman's brother were on the shoreline. As they prepared themselves for the photograph, the woman tripped over her high heels, causing everyone to fall off the boat and for the boat to capsize. The man who had been operating the vehicle quickly swam to safety, but the couple had no idea how to swim and just kind of floundered in the water until they were dead. Number 9. The train photo shoot. A woman in Texas named Fredzania Thompson was killed during a photo shoot. The young girl was only 19, an aspiring model who wanted to take some risky pictures on train tracks. Unfortunately, she never anticipated that there would be a train on those tracks, and she was hit by the moving vehicle while taking photos of herself. She had been trying to launch her modeling career, but all she managed to do was launch herself through the air to her death. According to what her mother told local news, Fredzania was attending Blinn College but had recently decided to postpone her education while she pursued modeling. As she was standing between two sets of tracks on March 10th, a train with the BNSF railway came speeding directly at her. She moved out of the way. She wasn't a complete fool, but she didn't realize that there was another train coming in the opposite direction on the other track. She moved to avoid one train and was struck by the other. As you can imagine, she died pretty much instantly. Nobody gets run over by a train and lives to tell the story. And to make matters even more tragic, she was due to turn 20 just a few days later and was engaged to be married. Plus, she never did find out if she had what it took to be a professional model. The rampaging train saw to that. Number 8. Holding up traffic. In the middle of New York City, a pair of men brought traffic to a standstill when they parked their supercar in the middle of the road and then posed on its hood to take pictures. It really doesn't get much more chauvinistic than that, and thankfully, these rich troublemakers got exactly what they had coming to them. The first thing to note is that their vehicle was a gold BMW worth around $120,000. The decision to stop the car in the middle of the busy street was made by Kobe Person, a YouTube personality. 2 lanes of traffic were forced to stop while the YouTuber and his friend got out of the vehicle and started posing against the hood. Naturally, the people around them beeped their horns and got extremely angry, but one guy got a little angrier than the rest. The last thing some ordinary person wants to see on their way to work is a young kid holding up traffic so that he can take a photo shoot with his luxury vehicle. The man got out of his car, took a baseball bat out of his trunk, and casually walked over to the boys and their supercar. He then began smashing in the windshield, while the guys doing the photo shoot screamed in horror. By the time the guy got back in his car, he'd done quite a bit of damage to the vehicle. And to be quite honest, after the youngsters uploaded the video online, pretty much nobody had any sympathy. Maybe next time they want to do a photo shoot, don't do it in the middle of busy traffic. Number 7. Cat from Hell. A model had her face ripped off after bravely trying to perform a photo shoot with a real, living leopard. Her name is Jessica Leidoff, and she will never look the same again. She was attacked by the cat from hell in Germany the second she walked into its enclosure. The leopard, named Troja, was 16 years old at the time. The facility that allowed this to happen is actually a home for retired show animals. Up until this point, Troja had always been relatively well behaved, but as soon as Jessica opened the door and stepped in with the big cat to take pictures, it carved her face open with its deadly claws. According to Jessica herself, the cat attacked her so fast that she didn't even realize what was happening. The cat sunk its huge fangs into her cheek, ripping apart her ear and puncturing her head. And for those who know anything about leopards, you'll know this is pretty basic behavior. Leopards have jaws so powerful that they can crush a person's skull in one bite. It's one of their favorite attack moves. The only reason Jessica survived the ordeal is that she managed to protect her face with her hands, and the leopard seemed to lose interest after a few moments. Jessica was able to roll away from the beast and scramble out of the cage. In a rather unexpected move, Jessica actually went back to the facility to visit the leopard after she healed. She said it was part of her therapy to get over the terrifying incident. The leopard was never euthanized. As everyone agreed, it wasn't the big cat's fault. Whoever had organized the photo shoot inside the cage of one of the most powerful predators on the planet is really the one who's to blame here. Would you be brave enough to get into a cage with a live leopard just to take photographs? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Death before a wedding. A prestigious doctor named Dennis Ricardo Faria Gurgel was killed in a freak accident just one day before he was to be wed. The young doctor was at a photo shoot for his wedding, with everything set up by the best in the business. But when a fishing rod he was holding came in contact with a high-voltage power line, Dennis was given such a brutal shock that he died right there on the spot. The doctor had been with his fiancée at the time of the photo shoot. As they were getting pictures taken together, they were on the banks of a reservoir, each holding a fishing rod to make it look as though they were fishing, when Dennis got his hook stuck in the power line. As a doctor, you would have thought he had a bit more sense about him. He actually tried to remove the hook from the power line with his hands, and this was what caused him to receive the deadly dose of electricity. He grabbed the line with both hands, a pretty shocking move for someone who spent so much time in school. Number 5. Helicopter disaster. Rachel Jordan was sitting in the front of a helicopter beside the pilot when her life changed forever. To her left was pilot Linda Harrop, while behind her was a newlywed couple. The couple had just exchanged vows at a fancy resort near the city of Christchurch, New Zealand. The passengers were all nervous to be in the helicopter, but the couple was set on getting the best wedding day photos ever. They wanted the mountains in the background, and their photos taken from inside the helicopter. Rachel Jordan was a photographer hired to go along with them, but before any photographs could even get taken, the helicopter suddenly malfunctioned. Without warning, the helicopter started to descend, then it dropped like a rock to the ground below. Every person on board was horribly injured, with spines breaking, legs snapping, and people being knocked unconscious. The truly remarkable thing is that nobody died. For Jordan, she spent 12 weeks in the hospital bed, with injuries to her ribs, sternum, feet, and lungs. She had to have several surgeries, and only recently started therapy to learn how to walk again. As for the happy couple, they too were left horribly crippled, but made full recoveries. The reason the helicopter fell out of the sky is still unknown, with the Civil Aviation Authority saying the engine stopped in the middle of flight, but they still don't know why. Number 4. Playboy gone wrong. A Russian model named Galina Fedorova, a woman who actually posed for Playboy, recently died in a freak accident while trying to complete a photo shoot in the middle of the ocean. The 32-year-old was found dead and bloated by the Coast Guard after she and her photographer went for a swim. They were on a boat trip for the photo shoot off the coast of Sardinia and had been doing a lot of partying. When police investigated the boat, they discovered it was littered with bottles of alcohol. But this freak accident kind of smells like foul play. When the pair went swimming, the boat somehow broke away from its anchor and ended up getting beached on a nearby reef. Because they couldn't make it back to the boat, Galina ended up drowning, but her photographer didn't. He left her behind and swam to shore, where she was left to sink to the bottom of the ocean. The photographer managed to help and was taken back to Sardinia, while the Coast Guard used a helicopter to find the lifeless body of the model. The photographer has not been charged with any crimes, but there's no way to prove that he had malicious intent. But the whole ordeal is extremely suspicious. Right now, Galinia's death has been labeled an accident, but out at sea, you just never really know. Number 3. Lockdown celebration fail. A woman from Kazakhstan was celebrating the end of the coronavirus lockdown when she made a tragic mistake. She was killed after stumbling off a cliff in Turkey and falling more than 100 feet to her death. It happened while she was posing for an end-of-lockdown photo shoot. The young woman's name was Alizia Sospitsina. She had been waiting months to go out hiking in the picturesque Dudin Park of Turkey's Antalya region. The adventurer, being deprived of anything exciting for so long, couldn't help herself. She just had to take the risky photo. She climbed over a safety barrier, stood at the edge of the cliff, and told her friend to take some snapshots. There was a majestic waterfall in the background. It was a truly beautiful scene. At least, it was, until she slipped on the grass, flipped over backwards, and plunged to her death. Her friend was absolutely horrified, but she reacted quickly enough to phone the authorities and alerted them of the accident. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do because she died on impact. Number 2. TikTok manslaughter. A cosplayer on TikTok with almost 2 million followers was just arrested in January after their friend died during a photo shoot. The popular cosplayer goes by the name Yandere Freak, real name Marianne Oliver Snow. According to the police report, Mary and some of her friends were playing with a gun. Yeah, you can probably see where this is going. The gun belongs to her ex-boyfriend. She thought the weapon was empty, assuming that her ex had taken out all the bullets before they broke up and moved out. It also didn't help that they were all extremely drunk during the photo shoot. When one of her friends said as a joke, "Oh, shoot me," Mary did just that. She leveled the firearm at her friend and pulled the trigger. Their name has not been released for privacy reasons, but we do know that Mary is currently facing manslaughter charges. But even though Mary is currently awaiting to go to trial for manslaughter, she is still posting cosplay photos on her TikTok account, seemingly unconcerned that she literally murdered her own friend. She's come under quite a bit of ridicule lately, and if her trial doesn't go very well, her lucrative TikTok career might just be over. And number 1, cosplay underwater. Speaking of cosplay gone wrong, a popular cosplayer from China recently died in the middle of a photo shoot while on holiday. The cosplayer went by the name Jovi Liu, and she had earned herself quite a dedicated following by dressing up as characters from video games and posing as a medieval princess. She was chosen to go to the holiday resort where she died by the photography company Kibao. There, she was supposed to model in a Japanese-themed photo shoot, but while she was posing beside the hotel pool, she tripped and fell in. Because she had never learned how to swim, she had no idea how to get back out again. And while you might be thinking, well, wouldn't somebody just dive in and save her? The answer is no, as she was swept under the current and dragged into the deep end of the pool. She was then trapped underwater for 3 minutes before hotel staff finally arrived and were able to get her out. Before the cosplay model made it to the hospital, she was already in a coma. The next day, she was pronounced dead because there was no more oxygen reaching her brain. The moral of the story here is that if you want to be a model and do photo shoots near the water, probably learn how to swim first. Number 10. West Virginia mother killer. In West Virginia, a woman has been charged with murder following the deaths of both her mother and sister. This diabolical woman allegedly staged their deaths to make it look as though their daughter killed the mother, then turned the gun on herself. It was an extremely elaborate scheme to get away with one of the worst crimes imaginable. It happened back in 2017, with the police originally convinced by the story that there was nobody else involved in the case except for the 2 dead people. It wasn't until later that they finally figured out Megan Hargan had set the whole thing up. She's responsible for the murder of her mother, Pamela, and her younger sister, Helen. She shot her mother in the head in the laundry room of their home, then blasted Helen in the upstairs bedroom. She might have gotten away with it too if she had staged the scene a little better. According to Fairfax County Police Major Ed O'Carroll, a hard look at the evidence proved the whole house had been set up to confuse the cops. He also called what happened domestic violence at its worst. As for why Megan turned on her mother and sister, a family friend told local news that Megan was very jealous. Her mother had purchased a home for her sister Helen while giving her nothing. She took her anger out on both of them in cold blood. Number 9. Internal demons. Chris Coleman was born into a community of evangelical Christians. His mother and father were preachers, meaning he spent his entire childhood being smothered by their way of thinking. When he entered high school, he became a normal teenager, going out and getting drunk and having fun. But being raised so hardcore Christian meant that he actually called his basketball coach and confessed that he had been drinking. In other words, he was a very conflicted individual. Chris grew up and met Sherry. Sherry got pregnant, and the two got married. But their marriage was doomed from the start. It's important to note that Chris was making a significant amount of money after they had their first child as head of security for a company. I'm talking at least $100,000 a year. This money changed Chris, made him cocky. He began to have an affair with Sherry's best friend from high school. The two became serious, and Chris began plotting how to get rid of his current wife. But like back when he was a teenager, his selfish desire clashed with his Christian upbringing. The scheme involved sending fake threats to himself. Chris lived beside a police detective named Justin Barlow with the Columbia Police Department. Chris sent himself threatening emails to try and make it look like somebody was interested in killing his entire family. Then on May 5th, 2009, the detective received a call from Chris. Chris said he had been trying to reach his wife, but she wouldn't answer the phone. When Barlow went to do a welfare check, he found both Chris's children strangled to death in their beds, with Sherry also dead from strangulation. Of course, it was Chris that did it. All evidence pointed to him killing his own family, just so he can escape with his wife's best friend and start a new life. He was charged with all 3 murders and given life in prison. Number 8. Laundry Day. Shane Fennell shot his sister-in-law over a bad laundry day. At least, that's how Shane had described his own motive in the fatal shooting that just took place in Oregon. His sister-in-law, Alexandra, was completely innocent. Her only crime was her marriage to Shane's brother, Jordan. When the two brothers got into a fight over laundry, Shane got so angry that he threw a potted plant at his brother, pulled out a gun, and walked straight over to his brother's wife, where she sat on a patio chair. She had her back to him, looking across the yard in the other direction, and probably trying to ignore the brothers fighting. She never even knew she died. Shane held the gun to the back of her head and pulled the trigger, blowing her brains out in front of her face. There was really no escaping this for Shane. He killed her in front of a witness and did it in cold blood. When police arrested him, he told them, "I did a horrible thing." And yeah, he sure did. Something tells me there was more than laundry at play here. Perhaps Shane was actually jealous of his brother's wife. Number 7. An addicted son. A man has beaten his elderly mother to death with a stick. According to the report in Latin Times, the man beat his mother with a stick because she refused to give him money to purchase drugs. The woman was just 60 years old when her son, 38, showed up in the early hours of the morning begging for money. He was already a known drug addict. He had already gotten in trouble with his brother for picking fights with their mom, and police had already gotten reports before that he'd beaten the woman up. The addict's son went too far. Locals in the town heard screaming at 4:30 in the morning, but didn't bother reporting it to the police because it happened so frequently. It was the man's brother who came upon the scene just as he was finishing off the mother with the stick. He thrashed her until she stopped moving, and sadly, the other brother intervened too late. The police were eventually brought to the house, at which point the drug addict was carried away, later being charged with murder. Number 6. Turning on the spouses. In the year 1924, 2 residents of Illinois decided they were going to murder their own spouses so that they can be together. This was Elsie Sweeten and the Reverend Lawrence Height, a couple of adulterers who needed to get rid of their pesky spouses so that they could run away and be happy together. Their method of killing was arsenic. The Reverend poisoned his wife, Anna, and Elsie murdered her husband, Wilford. She gave Wilford chocolate candy mixed with poison. He became super sick, and the next day, she mixed more poison in with his oatmeal and fed that to him. The final dose was fed the day after the oatmeal, with a healthy helping of poison to his tomato soup. Amazingly, the pair almost got away with the crime. But in the small town of Ina, back in the 1920s, secrets weren't exactly easy to keep. People were quick to realize that the two were consorting with one another. The sheriff got involved, and the whole thing blew up in their faces. The sheriff actually had to pick them up and drive them out of town so they wouldn't get lynched. What do you think could push 2 people to commit such horrible crimes against their very own spouses? Do you think it's inherent evil, or just the byproduct of some seriously sick minds? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 5. The worst brother. Julie Archer was 49 years old when she died from what had been described as horrific injuries. These injuries were the result of her brother, Stephen Archer, dousing her in a lethal mix of gasoline and mineral spirits inside her home. The mixture was made in a Pepsi bottle, what the prosecution in this case called an aggressively flammable liquid. While Julie was sitting on her sofa in the living room, Stephen emptied the bottle over her head and then ignited the vapor. Julie burst into flames and began to scream. At the time, her 19-year-old daughter was upstairs listening to the whole thing. She described the explosion as an earthquake, saying it literally shook the house. Julie, on fire and burning like a scarecrow, staggered outside and fell down in the front garden. Her daughter was trapped upstairs, choking on thick black smoke. And yet, even though she was almost already dead, Julie tried to drag herself back through the front door when she realized her daughter was stuck upstairs. But Julie just didn't have the strength. Luckily, her daughter managed to escape through the window and jumped out of the house. But let's go back to Stephen, who attempted to murder his own sister. There's no doubt that that's exactly what he was trying to do. He even wrote her a card while she was in the hospital, saying, "Karma has punished you through me." But she didn't get well in the hospital and died from her burns. Apparently, the whole reason for the vicious attack was that Stephen blamed Julie for the recent death of his father. Number 4. AR-15 and hammer. A man from Farmington has done something absolutely heinous. His name is Blake Thomas Maloney, just 26 years old. He's been charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 for his father, 1 for his mother, and 1 for his brother. If convicted, he'll be getting life in prison. It all began when the police received a call from somebody worried about her friend. Tracy Ann Maloney had gone to the house of her ex-husband to visit her sons, but never left. The friend was worried that something may have happened. When officers went to the residence to look, they found Blake Maloney inside, along with the corpse of Tracy, whom had been beaten to death with a hammer. He then placed a yoga mat over her face and let her bleed to death on the kitchen floor. Tracy was his mother. When the police searched the basement, they found Jack John Maloney dead and covered over with a blanket. He was killed by a gunshot wound to the head from when his own son, Blake, opened fire on him with an AR-15. And finally, 23-year-old Scott was also found dead from a gunshot wound to the head, Blake's own brother. Why did he do it? Blake Maloney turned out to be completely insane. He told investigators in an interview that he didn't believe those people were his family, so he murdered them. And that's it. He had no better excuse than that. He was just delusional and dangerous. Number 3. The Facebook Dad. A father in Canada killed off his entire family, one by one. He murdered his wife, his daughter, and his sister. And then to make things truly strange, he confessed everything he did in a bizarre Facebook post. His name is Randy Jansen, and his online friends were stupefied when an admission of homicide turned up on his Facebook wall. He admitted that he killed his daughter because she was suffering from severe migraines, and there was no end in sight for her pain. So, like a deer that you've accidentally hit with your car, Randy thought the best thing to do was put his daughter out of her misery. He did this with a bullet to her head while she wasn't looking. Then, to spare his wife the horror of knowing that her daughter was dead, he blasted her in the face too. The final victim of his murderous rampage was his sister, Shelley. He didn't want her living with the guilt and shame of knowing her brother was a murderer and that he'd killed her beloved niece. So, Randy drove to her home and shot her in the back of the head. Number 2. Maryland triple murder. In Maryland, Jeffrey Allen Burnham turned on his brother, attacked his sister-in-law, and also killed an elderly woman. Police officers originally discovered the body of Rebecca Reynolds in her home with obvious trauma. Someone had beaten the lady, 83 years old at the time of her attack, to death and then stole her 2020 Lincoln. The thief and murderer was Jeffrey. He did away with the lady just to get her car so he could drive to his brother and shoot him and his wife to death. Then after making quick work of his brother and his brother's wife, he stole their 2007 Corvette and took off. Police were able to identify the bright red Corvette pretty easily. Jeffrey was taken into custody in just a few hours. And when they questioned him, it turned out Jeffrey was an absolute lunatic. He was furious at his brother, who was a pharmacist, for allegedly poisoning people with COVID-19 vaccines. Jeffrey was so angry at the government and at his brother for helping in the vaccine rollout that he betrayed nearly 50 years of brotherhood. All family values went out the window, and his own crackpot theories led him to murder, then straight to jail. And number 1, a man gone crazy. A judge has sentenced Ronnie O'Neill to 3 consecutive life sentences, with an additional 90 years tacked on for good measure. He described what Ronnie O'Neill did as the worst case he had ever seen in 19 years as a judge. Ronnie is responsible for murdering his girlfriend and then turning on their own kids. In fact, his own son testified against him at the murder trial. From what was made clear at the trial, Ronnie murdered his own daughter, Ronavea, who just so happened to be special needs and unable to talk. But first, he murdered his girlfriend, Ronavea's mother, right in front of her. Because his daughter was special needs, she couldn't scream, she couldn't get away, she couldn't do anything. She was totally helpless, as her father bashed her in the face with a hatchet until she was dead. And all the while, his son was watching in utter horror and disbelief. Then Ronnie turned on his own son, but luckily didn't manage to finish the job before police and firefighters were on the scene. In the end, his son lived, but his daughter was gone forever. This was one of the most brutal attacks a parent perpetrated against their own kid that I've honestly heard of.
9. The man with the world's most bulbous nose. Patrick, a retired crane operator from Montana, suffered from the unsightly effects of rhinophyma, a progressive skin condition that causes scar-like tissue to grow on the nose. It started while he was working in Las Vegas under the harsh desert sun. He applied sunscreen, but it didn't really help, and Patrick's nose grew increasingly red and irritated. It also just grew, eventually reaching double its original size. The weight of the growth began making it difficult to breathe, prompting Patrick to reach out to Dr. Sandra Lee, better known by the name of her hit show, Dr. Pimple Popper. Have you seen her show? Anyways, sadly by then, his grandchildren had become scared of him because of his nose. He said he wanted the roughness removed and to look presentable again. Dr. Lee called it the most advanced case of rhinophema she'd ever seen, but she was determined to help Patrick get his life back. Using an electric cauterizer, she burned away years' worth of excess skin. It was the first of at least 2 procedures he needed, and its purpose was to reduce the swelling in Patrick's nose. The next time he went in, Dr. Lee scraped more of the skin away. By then, he was already looking like a brand new person. It's probably safe to say that Patrick's grandchildren no longer feared him from that day going forward. 8. Flesh-eating facial ulcers. Have you ever had an ulcer? A few months ago, 19-year-old Kirsten Cowell noticed that painful boils were appearing on her face. Assuming they'd go away on their own, the British teenager carried on with life as usual. But the open sores got even worse, barreling as much as 0.8 inches deep into her flesh. They seep pus and are covered in dark scabs, and only seem to be getting worse. Kirsten and her mother Allison believe she suffers from a condition called pyoderma gangrenosum, which covers the body in large open sores, causing skin and tissue to rot. It's gotten so bad she won't leave her house. She can't anyway, because the sun agitates her wounds. She's in constant extreme pain and can only eat foods that don't require chewing, because it hurts too much to move her muscles. The teen felt she had no other choice than to end her relationship and move back in with her mother, where she revolves her life around managing the condition. Doctors are treating Kirsten with antibiotics and steroids. Last month, they removed 18 of her scabs and cleaned her wounds. Her bandages are changed once daily, and she has to wrap her head in puppy pads so that pus doesn't get everywhere. Even worse than the physical pain is the hit to Kirsten's confidence that the flesh-eating condition has taken. She and her mother are hoping that the current treatment works, so that she can feel beautiful again and resume her normal life. 7. Turning into a Smurf. One day in 2008, an elderly man with blue skin appeared on the Today Show. His name was Paul Carrison, and you could almost mistake him for being a Smurf. He had started turning blue years earlier after trying to treat a host of medical ailments by rubbing a solution of colloidal silver all over his face. Carrison believed that the substance cured acid reflux and arthritis. He soon learned otherwise when, in 1993, his once freckled, fair-colored skin acquired a bluish tinge. It's a symptom of a condition called argyria, which is caused by excessive exposure to chemical compounds of the element silver. Once a person turns blue for this reason, there's no undoing it. The condition is permanent. During his Today Show appearance in 2008, Carrison said that he was still drinking the dangerous substance. And this is a good example of why the government banned colloidal silver in 1999. It has a tendency to collect in the organs and cause serious damage. Carrison's unique hue turned him into somewhat of a recluse in 2007. He relocated to California from Washington seeking greater community acceptance, but his luck continued to worsen. And in 2012, Carrison lost his home while battling prostate cancer and a heart ailment. He ultimately ended up at a homeless shelter and then died of a heart attack in 2013. 6. COVID toe. COVID-19 comes with an array of bizarre and painful possible symptoms. In recent weeks, people have become curious about something called COVID toe, after Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, said that he was experiencing it. The condition is caused by the body's immune response to the coronavirus. It turns the toes and sometimes the fingers purple, blue, or red. Cases of COVID toe appeared pretty early in the pandemic. The bizarre side effect isn't seen as often as some other symptoms, but it can last for months. Sometimes discoloration of the skin is the only symptom. In fact, many people don't even realize they have it until they look at their feet. But the condition can also be itchy and painful, and sometimes blisters develop, with pus pooling underneath the skin. Dermatologist Dr. Amy Pollard told NBC Sports that experts think COVID toe may be a response to inflammation. Prolonged cases seem more common among patients battling long-haul COVID, according to an analysis which noted that one person reported experiencing COVID toe for 6 months. On average, however, symptoms last for 12 days. Did you get COVID? What was the worst symptom you experienced? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 5. Pandemic-related psoriasis. 26-year-old Poppy Challenor has been battling psoriasis since she was 13 years old. When England went into lockdown at the beginning of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, her condition worsened noticeably. Psoriasis is an incurable autoimmune disorder that causes skin to become itchy, red, and sore, and to flake and bleed. Challenor began posting brutally honest photos of her flare-ups on social media to raise awareness about the condition and to remind young people that it's important to learn to live comfortably in their own skin. She named the account after her high school nickname, the Girl with Psoriasis, and recounted a time when someone described her skin as weird. Speaking with the Mirror, she described how her classmates got to know who she was based on psoriasis alone, rather than her other attributes or her personality. Shortly after she first noticed the symptoms, the rash spread all over her body. Nothing that the dermatologist prescribed helped, leaving Challenor itching and scratching all night long. Not wanting to appear different, she covered up the psoriasis as best she could by wearing long sleeves, even in the summer. At age 16, she told a boy she was interested in about the condition. He stopped talking to her because he was afraid it would affect him. But as Poppy blossomed into adulthood, she began to look at her psoriasis differently. She sees no reason to hide it. Challenor's flare-ups are often brought on by stress, leaving her skin flaky and raw. After losing her father to an industrial accident 2 years ago, she sank into a depression and exacerbated the condition by scratching constantly. But she finally got help when her doctor said that the psoriasis had spread too far. Psoriasis affects people differently. It's incurable but can usually be managed. Still, it's extremely uncomfortable to live with and can cause deep emotional wounds, as you've seen with Poppy's case. 4. Morgellons disease. Some experts believe that Morgellons disease is a skin condition. Others think it's a mental disorder. But pretty much all of them agree on one thing: it's a total medical mystery. Common symptoms include the sensation that something is crawling on, stinging, or biting the skin. Sufferers also often report small fibers protruding from their skin, as well as mood, memory, and concentration problems. Canadian singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell has made headlines numerous times in recent decades for her alleged battle with the controversial disease. She claimed that when her Morgellons was at its worst, she couldn't leave her house or even wear clothing. Her legs cramped up, forcing her to crawl across the floor. Mitchell believed that different colored fibers stuck out of her skin, and that they cannot be forensically identified as animal, vegetable, or mineral. Those who suffer from Morgellons disease will insist that it's not all in their head, and that their symptoms are physically debilitating. But this condition is poorly understood by experts, despite having first been described in the 17th century. Modern medicine has failed to explain or treat it. In 2001, a mother named Mary Latayo reportedly examined samples scraped from her son's skin under a microscope. He had long struggled with the symptoms of Morgellons, and Mary was determined to find answers. She claimed to have found unexplained fiber-like strands while examining some of his skin scrapings under a microscope. Doctors remained dismissive while the fight to understand Morgellons disease continued. In 2005, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, caved to mounting pressure to investigate the matter. Researchers took samples from 115 people claiming to suffer from Morgellons disease and found no parasites or bacteria that could be causing the disease. They concluded that it's simply a mass shared delusion, especially considered how many of the people who experience symptoms have histories of addiction and psychiatric ailments. Will scientists ever get to the bottom of what Morgellons disease is and what causes it? Only time will tell. 3. Deadly shedding. Epidermalic ichthyosis, EI, is a rare condition that causes the skin to grow and shed up to 10 times faster than normal. The skin becomes so dry, blistered, and scale-like that it often makes it hard for the patient to move at all. In 2017, news outlets around the world reported on Maddie Hoffman, a 9-year-old Texas girl with EI. Because of her reddened appearance, strangers often mistook her for a burn victim. Kids bullied her at school for both her appearance and her odor, which is caused by the condition. Maddie's daily routine involves spending 2 hours removing dead skin cells and taking measures to prevent a potentially fatal infection. When she was born, doctors told her mother, Emily, that Maddie may not survive. Emily had to wait a week to hold her baby for the first time in an isolation room, wearing a mask and gloves. The daily scrubbing ritual not only helped to keep Maddie alive, it seems to have slightly improved her condition. She has one of the most severe forms of ichthyosis, which requires hours of treatment daily, according to Emily. The longer Maddie goes without her daily care routine, the higher her chances are of catching a potentially deadly infection. Her discomfort also grows as she accumulates more scale-like skin. An estimated 1 in every 200,000 people is affected by epidermalic ichthyosis. Babies born with this condition are at an especially high risk of dying from an infection, making it imperative to put them straight into quarantine. 2. Life-threatening to the touch. Imagine having skin so fragile that it blistered and fell off just from being touched. That's a daily reality for people like 9-year-old Gabrielius Mirsorinkovas, who suffers from a rare genetic disorder called recessive dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa, RDEB. Immediately after he was born, doctors noticed that he had lost skin from his leg. He's one of just 100 so-called butterfly children in the UK, who are nicknamed for having skin as delicate as a butterfly's wing. Gabrielius's parents change his bandages at least 3 times a day and pop the dozens of blisters that form from coming into even slight contact with something. Yuck! He distracts himself from the pain by watching TV or playing video games. Watching Gabrielius endure the debilitating condition is heartbreaking to his mother, Holita, who told The Sun, the only way to help him is to hurt him. He can't do most things that boys his age love to do, like play sports, ride a bike without training wheels, or even eat the school lunch food, because it's too hard. Sadly, there's no treatment for RDEB, which worsens with age and leaves many kids wheelchair-bound by the time they reach their teens. The damage to their skin that accumulates over the years often also leads to cancer. Researchers are working to develop an effective stem cell treatment that will hopefully lead to reduced inflammation and pain. So far, the results are promising. 1. Death by herpes. Death during pregnancy or childbirth is rare in first world countries, but it still occasionally happens. In May and July of 2018, 2 new mothers died from infections caused by the HSV-1 strain of the herpes simplex virus. HSV-1 is pretty common. It causes sores around the mouth and/or genitals, and it's extremely rare for someone to die from it. Kimberly Sampson and Samantha Mulcahy went to the same hospital, where they both had C-sections and were in excruciating pain afterward. In both cases, the women received antibiotics for suspected bacterial infections, but the treatment didn't work, and they both died from herpes infections that were discovered when it was too late to save their lives. Thankfully, their babies were not infected. But one death from herpes is rare, and 2 herpes-related deaths within a few months of each other is practically unheard of. Neither Kimberly nor Samantha had herpes before. Their lack of natural immunity, coupled with the late stages of pregnancy, unfortunately spelled disaster for both. Suspicious that the 2 deaths were somehow linked, the women's families implored the coroner to investigate the matter. But the coroner declined, claiming that there was no connection between the tragedies. The family obtained access to the investigation documents, which show that the parts of the virus that were tested were identical between both cases, reflecting a herpes strain that is rare among London's last decade of cases. Neither woman had any sores or skin symptoms, indicating that neither of them got it sexually or from skin-to-skin contact. Moreover, the same surgeon and midwife had carried out both women's C-sections. One email pointed towards surgical contamination as the cause of the herpes infections and called for a sample to be taken from the surgeon involved. Speaking with the BBC, sexual health expert Peter Greenhouse speculated that the surgeon unknowingly passed the virus onto the women. But the trail seems to end there for now, leaving Kimberly and Samantha's grieving loved ones without the closure they so desperately seek. Thanks for watching. Do you have any stories you think belong on this list? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye.